Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today, my guest is Ryan Gravelle. Ryan has a law firm based here in Austin called Kastner Gravelle. They currently have, I think he mentioned 20 plus practicing attorneys with the firm in several cities across Texas. Ryan has become a good friend. We've actually worked together professionally for a little over 5 years now. I think we had met at a consumer goods business that we were both working with and just sort of struck up a friendship. A lot of the challenges that he's faced in building a law firm are similar to the challenges that we've faced in building a technology service firm. So there's some discussion around that in this conversation. Ryan's just good people. I've enjoyed spending time with him, getting to know him over the course of the last several years. His professional bio, he has 20 plus years of experience working with startups and emerging growth companies in the technology and consumer goods spaces, both in private practice and as an in-house general counsel legal executive. He's had several jobs working in-house for companies. He now is building this firm. And we cover a lot of ground in this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, this is Ryan Gravelle. The beauty of doing something like this is it forces you to sit down and think through how to capture moments more actively. Because there's so much of like my kids, when Lincoln was 3 and we had Lawson, there was so much of Lincoln's third year that we lost because Lawson was so high need. He was so high touch. He just had really bad colic and always wanted to be held. Yeah. And I realize now in hindsight, like Lawson's whole third year of life, we realized how special that time was. And then we had this coupled regret of like, oh, we missed that time with Lincoln because we were just mentally elsewhere. Yeah. So the exercise of sitting down and trying to record something that will remain, that we can go back to later. Yeah. I recognize the things that we recorded back then that we go back to now and how important they are that we have them. Yeah. So like getting my kids in here is something I would really like to do. Oh, totally. Because why not, right? If it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of effort, but then you have this thing that you can go back to later on, it just has so much more value.
I think there's like this constant tension between the visceral experience and the in the moment and I'm here versus like the technological layer and like the benefit you get from preserving it. I don't know, like I don't know where I sort of fall on that kind of thing, but I think you're right. I had a conversation recently about like the impossibility of creating scarcity where it doesn't exist. We're talking about like child raising and opportunity and you know how to kind of point your kids, which I've got one heading to college in the fall. I just dropped him off at an orientation at UT. And so it's like, it's all very, very front of mind of like, okay, now I'm at this phase, right? I'm further down the road than you are. And with my 2 boys where, you know, one's about to head out into the real world and you just think about all these kind of philosophical things that suddenly just come to the forefront. Yeah. But that is one of those things you think about, like the experiences you've had and the trips you took and, you know, but those moments where you discover the old video or something, even it's better when you didn't know it was there and you come across it and you're like, this is amazing.
The concept of tension that you bring up there, specifically as it relates to trips, where the things that you remember from the trips that were the most memorable almost never were planned on. They were never part of the itinerary. Yeah. It wasn't the thing that you sat down and you said, we're going to go to this bluff and catch a sunset and take good pictures of it. Yeah. It's always like the thing that we did over here that got screwed up that made it to where we were there at sunset where we wouldn't have been otherwise, and then we captured this moment. Yeah. And it didn't matter that you recorded it, whether you recorded it or not didn't matter. No. Like that was the hallmark of the trip.
I have a great example of this
I can't wait.
Like very, very recent experience. So we just, you know, because my kids are like getting...
How old are your boys?
So 17 and 19. So
17, 19.
About to be a freshman in college, about to be a junior in high school.
How many months apart?
Both boys, 20 months apart.
20, okay.
Which over time, that closeness went from really problematic to really nice. Yeah. I always called it like the blood-love ratio. Right. It's like how much time are we spending like annoying each other and fighting versus, you know, arm in arm. And as I think often happens, or I'm very grateful it has happened, they've gotten really close, which is making the older one's departure to college tough, you know, because the younger one's like, man, we're just hanging out now and we're looking out for each other. And So anyway, we've thought a lot about how we spend our time and travel and all this kind of stuff. So we try to do a good trip where, you sort of like force everybody's time together because there's not an alternative.
Mm-hmm.
And then reality is you get on these trips and they're amazing and you spend every meal together and you do all these activities. But we just recently were over in Spain and we had this great trip. It was all the more like salient because we just knew, I was just like thinking in my head the whole time, like, is this the last one of these that we do? Or, and it won't be, but you're just kind of thinking about all that.
Yeah.
So, but to your point about planning and the sort of like the little moments and the accidental moments. I mean, a lot of the stuff we did was as anticipated and it was like amazing. We had this one day we were up in the mountains and we tried to do some, active stuff when we like to hike and we like to rappel down waterfalls and do all this kind of stuff. It's not anything crazy, but it's just like to be out there.
Rappelling down a waterfall is not anything
I didn't
crazy.
get to do that one, but my wife did that
What
with the
part
boys.
of Spain were you in?
We were in Catalonia, so like Barcelona and then the Pyrenees, which was super cool. So we were right on the kind of French border. Never been up there before, never been to Spain. And we did a mountain biking trip one day, which was descent. So we were cheating like gravity.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And then we did a rafting trip the next day. So there's like an area up there that's well known for its rafting. And we had this guide who had been taking us around the kind of mountains and just really knowledgeable guy, really just like local, lived in one of the local villages. And we had a day where we were trying to do all of this stuff. Like we had a rafting trip and then we were supposed to, go up the mountainside and meet a shepherd when he brought his flock in and learn about it's just kind of one of those like learn a little bit about the culture, have some cheese, like have an experience and all that. And so our guide's on the phone and he's talking to this guy up in the mountains and they're like, the temperature's too hot. The sheep aren't coming in. Like the sheep are supposed to be here at 4:30.
Sheep didn't show up on time.
Sheep didn't show up. He's like, all right, other sheep are about like an hour and a half out. And it had been a long day. We'd been rafting. It was hot up there. And we were two of the four of my family get kind of motion sick. So you're driving around the Pyrenees and everyone's like, oh man, I don't really want to do another like adventure where we're driving around and feeling sick. So the guide's like, hey, I just don't think this is going to come together. If it does, it's going to be really late. Do we want to bail and do something else? And I was like, I think so. And he's like, if you want, I can take you to my village. We just like poke around a little bit. And I'm like, that sounds awesome, right? Like there's this big village culture up there that I wasn't aware of at all, but it's unlike, I grew up in Denver and the high country and the classic kind of like these big ski resorts and then the big city. And up there, it's like these little villages that are, I don't know, 20 to a couple hundred people, about 1 to 2 kilometers apart, all through like the valley floor. And everybody sort of knows each other, but they have their own place and they have their own history. And so this guy, just as a way to kill the afternoon, took us up to his village. We drive up in, I don't know, kind of halfway up the hillside. You get to this sort of like cobblestone motor court with about 10 to 15 stone homes built around it that are 1,000 years old, like several hundred to 1,000 years old, that have been built like room by room over the years. And there's a, beautiful church in the corner and somebody's like looking for the keys for the church and they're calling around the village. It's just like, it's all really small and intimate. And this guy just takes us up there and he's like, wow, I thought my wife had the keys to the church, but we don't have them. So, and we sat outside the church on this little bench and he goes, this village has been around for hundreds of years. And this is kind of where the elders would sort of like sit and talk about and make important decisions. You're looking at this like, 180 view of the valley and it's just peaceful. You're up in the mountains and guy's kid comes out, his kids start talking to my kid. They're like broken Spanish, broken English, but they're like talking and then they find common ground in Brawl Stars, he says, the video game. And their kid's like this awesome player. He's like 13 years old. I'm like, what a moment, right?
Yeah.
We're sitting with this guy experiencing like his real life, which was very like intimate. And they like let us into that. And it was definitely one of the most meaningful things like on that trip or that I've experienced. It's like when you really get to sort of see not just the manufactured piece of it, because you're plenty of that.
Completely the truth.
Yeah. So anyway, it was a great reminder of that tenet.
There's nothing like a plan that comes together.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But oftentimes it's not the plan coming together that was the most memorable thing.
Right.
Yeah. Especially on trips. And I think that my wife and I are a good balance in that if she's allowed to, she'll plan every minute and she'll have it down on a piece of paper and everybody will have their watch set to the same time. She's very meticulous about stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Really?
And the reality is, with me not wanting to plan anything, having a blank piece of paper going into a conversation, and her wanting to plan everything, it creates this constant tension where when we have a curveball get thrown, I'm much more likely to just be like, we'll ride with it. And it becomes a memorable thing.
Yeah.
And then when things are going completely awry and off the rails and we need a plan to be put together in order to salvage whatever afternoon we have left, she can step in and say, okay, let's skip to number 8 on the itinerary and we can just do that now.
Yeah.
So
I'm your wife in our equation.
Yeah.
I'm often the one that like over plans, overly rigid.
So your wife's not that
overly
way.
Type A. We're actually different flavors of that same one, but she's like more chill than I am. And I'm the one that's like, we said we were going to be having breakfast at 8:30 and it's like 8:31 and everyone's like, it's breakfast.
Chill,
it doesn't
Dad.
matter. Yeah. So I have to like constantly work on those trips too. And in life in general, it's like a work in progress that I don't know how much progress I've made, but to just not get overly indexed or to have a proportional response to things. But like knowing that it's that sort of like off the beaten path, that sort of unplanned thing that has value, not just on a trip, but like in life. Sort of circling back to my, oldest one going off to college. It's so hard to pull yourself out of your own frame of reference because it's all you've known. And my path has worked well for me, but it's a path and it's probably not a super risky path. And so you're like, okay, let's play some probabilities here. If you do this and then you do this, and it feels very linear and progressive. And then you and I have had some of these conversations over the times we've, gathered. Like I know a gazillion people that have had all kinds of success with a gazillion different paths, right?
Yeah.
And some of them looked like they were going way off on the, right turn, and they're super happy or they're super successful or whatever. Like,
and to the outside world, it just seems like they made mistake after mistake after mistake until one hit, and then all of that string of mistakes made total sense because it pointed them that direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being wired the way that you're wired, where you want to be meticulous and you want to plan everything out, your entrepreneurial story is very different than mine.
Yeah.
Because I would have used my like laissez-faire, I'll start an IT company. I'm not an IT guy, but we'll figure that piece of it out and just jump into it headlong and make a lot of mistakes along the way because of it. Whereas everybody that I know that's as meticulous as you tend to be would probably not even have started a business to begin with because they can't plan out every little element of it.
Yeah.
And the unknowns are too much to get over.
Yeah.
So when did you start Kastner Gravelle? When did the
2010?
2010.
Yeah.
So you're 14 years in now.
14 years in.
What led up to it?
Yeah.
How do you go from solo or from practicing attorney with other firms to wanting to do it on your own in the first place?
Yeah, without sinking your viewership to zero with a boring story.
It's already at zero, so
that's
good.
That's awesome.
That's a good place to start.
Expectations and never
no
building
expectations.
Up. So I can embellish. No, the quick summary of the progression was I got out of law school and I went to a really big firm, and then I changed cities. I moved into technology. I moved up to Austin. Another big firm.
Where were you?
I was in Houston.
You were in Houston.
Yeah. So I'd done undergrad in Houston, and so I kind of my sort of goal in life and my philosophy, and I still sort of like subscribe to this and try to teach this to my kids, which is start with a wide funnel, get exposure. So when I was coming out of law school, the market wasn't terrific, but it was pretty good. But the guidance was like, well, go to a city, go to a place where there's a logical connection. And from there, that was Denver or Houston, because those are the places that I lived, or Charlottesville, where I went to law school. So DC, and I didn't really have any interest in doing that. And so I went to Houston because it was a huge city. I went to a big law firm because I could work in a group and get exposure to a lot of stuff. And so winnow the funnel down from there. And sure enough, within 18 months of practicing, I got some exposure to a couple of like more tech-ish businesses where I was really heavily exposed to energy and oil and gas. And I was like, this just feels like a better fit. This smaller teams there. I wasn't keyed in on the entrepreneurialism, but I realized that's kind of what appealed to me. I liked smaller teams, everybody wearing a lot of hats. There wasn't a lot of sort of like, I don't know, like pomp and circumstance. And when I was in the energy industry, it was cool. I was working on big transactions that were like in the Wall Street Journal, but I was one of 40 lawyers on it. And I was like the little guy in the, it's like, and you just sort of look at the ladder, and I'm kind of ambitious. And I was like, I could see that ladder was going to be too long for me to climb, or just looking around being like, is this the right industry and all that. So anyway, that got me to Austin in 2000. Caught the last year of the dot-com boom, and then
with a big firm.
With a big firm, and then all the dot-com bust. And through pure happenstance and good fortune, when I moved to that firm, I got staffed on a client that happened to be one of the last companies that went public before the dot-com bust. And so it made it out there, and it was a very capital-hungry business, so they were always doing something. So as their lawyer, I was always pretty busy. And so during a time where there was like a desert of activity for a few years, I was busy enough, and it really kind of like saved so I stayed at the firm, things rebounded, and I was able to just kind of continue to grow there. And then I did a stint at a big company. I wanted to kind of be embedded in a business because I realized I liked the advising side and the counseling side, and I was like,
this was in-house counsel?
This is in-house counsel.
Yeah.
That was a big company, and then fast forward to, I went to a smaller company that was like a venture-backed, enterprise SaaS startup that was doing a lot of deals, and I was a deal lawyer, but I'd been in-house and had more general experience. And so this is like 2007, and I did one of these like classic startup experiences where it was like straight up growth and then financial market meltdown, and it was pretty gnarly, right? Like we were experiencing in almost a concentrated fashion what was happening in sort of the macro market. We had we'd done a bunch of acquisitions. We sold to some financial services verticals that were completely decimated. And so we had to like sell some stuff, go into contraction mode, preserve the core of revenue. Like the whole exercise changed. So
when was that timeline wise?
That was, 2007 I joined. We grew really quickly. Yeah, we did, 8 acquisitions in a year and a half. Grew the company sort of like tenfold, if not more, and then hit that sort of period where we're like, okay, let's batten down the hatches. It got harder to raise capital. We had to sort of sell some assets off, and the company survived, and then ended up getting acquired just a couple of years ago. So it was interesting. Like it made it through, but in that sort of downturn, my job went from a lot more strategic to a lot more tactical. It was, we had leadership that was changing pretty rapidly, and, became one of those like, let's survive this and maybe like find a buyer. And right around the time that there was like all that tumult in the market, Evan Kastner, who's my co-founder, and who I'd known previously and been friends with, was at the old big firm. And he was like, I don't know that this platform makes sense for certain parts of what we want to do in the startup world. And I don't think it's well served in Austin. And you're a in-house counsel, so you're the consumer of these services. Let me like run some stuff by you. Let's like go get a coffee. So we had a coffee at Mozart's, one of my like favorite places in Austin to this day, but good memories for that reason too. And he said, yeah, I think there's just like a vacuum in the market for folks that are doing the early stage tech, VC, let's go do it. And what do you think? You're a GC. Does this resonate with you? And I'm like, yeah, it resonates with me. And it's a pretty interesting model. And I agree with you that it's underserved. And my own sort of world was kind of like, whoa, what's happening here? Like I had a spot there, but the character of it changed a lot. So there was an opportunity to brainstorm a bit. And the real crux of sort of like how it started was interesting because we started having some conversations, and there were 4 of us at the time that were kind of brainstorming on this thing and thinking like, hey, let's like start something. And I just wasn't thinking a lot about the logistics of that. It was more, does this make sense from a business model standpoint? And who are the people that I'm sitting here talking with? And do I like those people? And that's where my focus was more. And then in the background, one of the co-founders of the company that was, the straight up, straight down, had gone off to start a consulting business in Houston. And he said, hey, we really liked working with you. I think we have some needs on the legal front. We also probably need a COO. And do you want to take that on? And I was like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And I had this I feel like I've back into all these epiphanies, but I was like, that sounds great. Like, I know a lot of people that do multiple things, and I'm like, maybe I can do the firm thing with these guys because I really think there's something there. And then be the COO, and I'll sort of and as long as everybody sort of understands that, I'll do this here, and I'll do this here, and I'll be back and forth to Houston.
How'd that work?
I did it for about a month, and I was like, I'm going to do both of these poorly.
Yeah.
And so my wife, who is always the voice of sort of reason and insight in our relationship and a lot of these conversations, she's like, do what you know how to do. Like, do what's natural. Like, you know how to practice law, you know how to develop business, you know how to do that part of it. This other thing was a little bit more orthogonal. Like, it was in an industry I knew, but it was a new role. I really liked the team, but it felt a lot more risky. And at the time I was like, there's just such a deep resonance about what these guys were doing. And it didn't feel risky at all. I was like, that's a balance sheet exercise. Like, as long as we control our bottom line and be a startup and scrappy. And I was like kind of excited about that. I was like, I think we can go get the business. I think our business model will resonate. And so that felt less risky. So it's funny I did technically start a thing, and we very much view it as a startup. And I think that, again, that helps us really kind of connect and resonate with our client base, because they're like, hey, we're all doing this journey.
A lot of them are startups too.
You and I have talked about this. Your
very
business,
much so.
They were all startups. We're all trying it, but it felt like it was so core to what I had been doing that the startup part of it didn't occur to me that we could probably fall on our face. I was aware of it. We wanted to, but it was a lot easier to keep the lights on than I thought. So it didn't feel too risky.
Yeah.
And the other one ended up bumping around for a little bit, and I helped them with some outside legal stuff, and then they got acquired pretty quickly, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do. And I was like, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
To just lean into the thing that we were talking about before we started rolling, what's exciting to you? And what was exciting to me about that one was it felt a little disruptive. It felt like we were the underdog, and I really like that. And this town's been great for sort of the underdog, and I really liked the people, and we've ended up having some iterations over the years, and doing it with people you trust and can really, and you're aligned with in terms of your philosophies and life and business and all that. So
yeah,
we continue to come back to those touchstones. And so anyway.
Does the model, is it accurate to say that you all are positioned as like in-house counsel, but the outsourced version of it?
Yeah.
Is that pretty fair?
Sometimes.
So how long, talk about the life cycle with a customer when you take on a new customer.
Mm-hmm.
And you're serving their needs when they're small.
Yep.
Is there a point at which they outgrow you?
Sometimes.
What's the catalyst for that? When would they need in-house counsel and not need your services? Sometimes
there's a couple different types of the growth, right? And when we started, it was just 4 of us, and we're all from big firms, right? So we'd all worked at 1,000 lawyer firms that are based in New York or LA or San Francisco or something like that. And I think when we rolled out, the marketplace, I think, thought oh, that's cute, pat you on the head. Why don't you work with some little startups and help them get formed? And then when they need something real, they'll come to our firm, right? So our opportunity and our mandate was, we have, our advantage was the ability to have instant, at inception or pre-inception relationships, right? And to start that genuine relationship and that stickiness. And then the opportunity is how long can you serve them and help them grow and grow with them, because you're sort of already in there at the, once you've established mutual trust and a good partnership and you're giving good advice and they like the counseling, it's okay, that's a really good, solid relationship. Now it's your opportunity to drop the ball if you can't do X, Y, and Z. And so we had to do a lot of like thinking about our business model and what we want to do. For what we do, it's more that early stage growth but it's transactional. So we help a lot of companies raise capital and we do a lot of M&A, and then we do a lot of the sort of like growing the business and the cap table, the commercial agreements, but also the growing the team and hiring and, you know, adding equity incentive and all this kind of stuff. So at some point, companies can outgrow us in the sense that they're, you know, I think that we haven't had too many examples of that happening, but where it's happened, there's some, like a business like Tecovas is a good one. Like we with those guys really early on, really solid team, management team. They had an international element, they had a manufacturing element. They were starting to have these workflows that weren't going to be under our roof.
Where they needed some sort of specialization.
And sometimes there's like a appeal of like, well, big firm, one-stop shop. I guess I don't mind the sort of price differential because I just need somebody who can do litigation.
Right.
I
need to make a phone call.
Yeah, we need to make a phone call and then you figure it out from there. And I think what we've grown into, despite, you know, a 25 lawyer footprint, is for most of the things that like a startup emerging growth company or even sort of like a scaling company, we can actually, we're 95% of those phone calls. And then we try to be sort of a hub and spoke model. It's like, well, if I'm not the litigator, or I'm not the real estate person, or I'm not the regulatory person, because it doesn't really make sense for us to have that under our sort of like narrow focused roof from a business model standpoint. It's my job to make sure we know who those folks are.
Right.
That can be a very quick, very seamless feeling referral conversation and have a similar look and feel and DNA and price point and all that. So that's our job, to sort of make that feel like it's all one.
Yeah.
But so I would say,
you're kind of curating talent at that point.
But there are companies we work with, you know, giant companies that are public companies, that we help them buy smaller companies. And these are, you know, multi-billion-dollar companies, but we're not their only counsel, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think I spent some time at Dell, and I think when I was at Dell, well over 100 outside lawyers, like law firms, probably, because you have regional and you have these different like subsets. It's like doctors. It's like, well, I don't do this thing. I do this thing.
Well, we're a tiny company, and by comparison, and y'all aren't the only firm we work with too, because we've got this need over here that we need a litigator for, and we've got this need over here that requires more paperwork and org formation docs and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
They're just not the same discipline.
Yeah, that's right. So you have to kind of pick. I think I tell another story that from like our early days that was like a really seminal moment in how I thought about our business and our growth, and I tell it to our younger lawyers too. You have to sort of pick, do I want to be like Johnny or Jane on the spot to everybody for everything? Like whatever comes in the door, be like, I can help you with that. And that's a really valuable thing. And do you go, you know, a mile wide and a centimeter deep and kind of do a bunch of things? Or do you say, I'm going to really focus on what I do. And if I do that, then I build up a ton of competence and a ton of sort of like innate efficiency, because this is kind of what I do. And I know the market in it, and I know the players, and I have market intelligence. And for us, that's what we've done within sort of like tech and consumer goods. Mm-hmm. And when we started, you know, we could have said, well, we're general corporate lawyers, and so yeah, we can help buy that dry cleaners, and we can help, you know, do this thing, and we could probably help you get through a divorce, and we could probably do some nonprofit stuff. And I think if you do that, one lesson is sort of like whatever you get, if you do it well, it begets more of that thing, right? And so we had an opportunity really early on, like a month into our firm's existence. So sort of like flashback to when Live Oak started, and you're like, I'm going to do this. And you're like, I hope there's customers, right? And so we had like a rolling start, but the goal, it was all opportunity. It was all greenfield at that point. And we're like, we hope it works. You know, we have this cheap office space, and, you know, again, keeping the cost to a bare minimum. Mm-hmm. But I had a friend who was really involved in the like Circuit of the Americas F1 track when that was coming together. So this, you know, is 2010. So it's kind of around that time zone that you had all these like mega players, Red McCombs and Bernie Ecclestone and Tavo Hellman and Bobby Epstein. You had like landowners and rights owners, and you had the city involved, and this big thing to build a Formula One racetrack.
That's a complicated transaction.
That's a complicated thing, right?
A lot of complicated transactions.
So we had an opportunity again, like a month into our life, where a friend called me up and he said, "Hey, this thing's come together." He was a lobbyist and just was in the middle of these kinds of conversations, and he'd gone to law school, but he's not a practicing lawyer, and he's like, nobody has counsel, or that if they were, they weren't involved. And he's like, there's an opportunity to like inject you into this. Do you want that? And I was like, thank you for thinking of me. Let me like mull on that, right? And talk to my partners, my brand new partners, and let's kind of figure this out. And you're like, that is a high profile, probably high dollar piece of work. And whatever it was, we didn't really know. But it also wasn't the thing that we knew how to do. Could we have done whatever they needed to do? Yes. I'm like confident in our abilities to like figure stuff out.
Yeah.
Smart people, and like we can read the law and apply it and do our job. But it was this kind of like, we're just starting this thing. Do we want to take our first step as like maybe a really significant step off of this path that we've decided would be the best way to go? And I don't even know how conscious it was to sort of like make sure we had the narrow path, but it was clear to me that this thing could be really distracting, or it could be maybe we didn't do a good job with it, and
then that's your reputation.
Right? So there's all. It just felt like that doesn't feel like the right thing to do, but it was really hard to. And I was like, maybe we'll get some tickets, and this will be this fun thing, and we'll get more, So you just kind of go through all this in your head, and a business just starting up that barely had any revenues and had a handful of customers, and you're like, no, we're not going to take that work. And so it took a lot of like intestinal fortitude, and it was good because we had some good partnership conversations early on where we kind of said, is this the right thing to do? And honestly, it didn't.
Yeah, it was a catalyst for some lines in the sand for the business.
Yep. And we've had some of those over the years where you go, hey, here's an opportunity, but do we really want to do this because it doesn't align with kind of what we want to do? Or it's, more often than not, the interesting ones, and I'm sure you have this too with your business, are sort of like, when do you do these kind of concentric circles of expansion with your business where you're like, this isn't totally what we do, but we have an opportunity here. Do we want to do that? Do we want to plant a flag in that space? And so then you kind of just have these more thoughtful conversations about expansion. And sometimes you go, no, we don't.
Yeah.
Let's double down over here. But I mean, to me, what's really fun about this is the strategic part of it, the growing a business, and how are you going to expand it, and how are you going to deliver? And it's very, I just think back to my time at like giant multi-billion-dollar companies where you felt like you couldn't influence things quite as much, and like, fail or succeed, this is like, it's me and my partners. And
so
it's our decisions.
sometimes you have those choices where you would say, we don't have deep experience in this, but instinctively we feel like this is an area we should play in a little bit more. Do you have a decision-making tree for which of those to take on and actually expand into?
Sometimes. I mean, part of that decision...
What are some times you've done that before where it was successful and actually informed the direction of the business?
Yeah, well, we talked about one earlier today, which was, we started working with like Deep Eddy Vodka. And again, that's another one where about a year or two into our business, I had an intro from a friend. It was an opportunity to work with a business that we had all come from technology firms and done, mostly like kind of Silicon Valley background, Silicon Valley DNA. And that's what we knew. And that makes it sound a little narrower than it is. You get exposed to a lot of different businesses, even if you have a, pretty tight focus. But there was an opportunity to represent, Deep Eddy, which was a big growing brand and really interesting group. And
already at the time?
Already at the time.
They were big and growing?
They were in existence. They had raised some capital. They wanted to raise some more. They were still a few years out from their ultimate acquisition in 2015. And, Clayton Christopher, who's a, kind of a giant in the consumer space, who had already had some successes and had grown Sweet Leaf Tea and sold it. So anyway, there were a lot of reasons to go, okay, the decision tree is sort of like, do we have any right doing this? And that was easy because if you sort of take it apart, you're like, oh, we haven't done 20 vodka deals, but do they need to raise capital, and is there corporate governance, and is there cap table management, and are there commercial agreements, and is there, all these things, employment, and, some of the tax, like, yeah, we can do all that stuff. And so, but it was just in a different umbrella.
Yeah.
So we started working with them. And then right around the same time, we started, working with Kendra Scott Jewelry, which was like another, high-flying brand, really well-known, founder. And you start putting a couple of those together, and then we started having a lot more detailed, focused conversations around like the consumer stuff, and thinking, okay, we're not just a technology firm, we are a startup and emerging growth, business and transactional firm that happens to focus on tech. And we go, should we be more deliberate about messaging and marketing and planting our flag in the consumer space? And we decided to do that. So fast forward a decade, and we're probably, I would say 70-30, 75-25, kind of around there, of technology to consumer across a pretty broad client base. Because we work with early stage businesses, we work with a lot of them and stay with them through their growth. And some of them don't make it, or they just kind of stay small. And
Those people are nomadic.
Some of those break through. Yeah, exactly.
They'll start one thing and then have fun with it, and then when it ceases to be fun, or they have a better idea, they'll go do something else.
And we're in the same business, right? Like, everyone's in the, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
As humans, we're just in the relationship business. I don't know. And I think, to me, that is the most fun thing that I get to do. Like, we're a good example of this, right? We met in a business context. We really enjoyed hanging out, and we've had a number of coffees, and then suddenly we were like, hey, we should do this, record. It's really fun for me to hear about what people are doing and hear about their decisions and their, like, the people part of it, which is really funny because I'm actually an introvert. I think I'm like a selected extrovert, very selective. But when I find people I really like, and in that small group setting, which, again, dialing back to sort of like working for giant oil companies versus working for like small groups of entrepreneurs, it just felt better. And so you have an opportunity as like, IT service provider, or as a lawyer, or as an accountant, or whatever, to start working with these people and be a part of their growth, which is like super fulfilling. And all the while, and it's not like I'm best friends with all my clients. I don't think you need to be, but it's really fun to develop relationships with clients.
Yeah.
I've got a client who's now been really instrumental in helping my son learn about a particular field that he's now going to go study in college. It was awesome, and because there was a genuine relationship there. And that's like the secret sauce, right? So we have multiple, like you're talking about the nomads, and we've got multiple examples now, 14 years in, where somebody's on their second or third or maybe fourth business where we're helping them do that.
Yeah.
And when you sort of get that deep connection with any of these kind of pockets of, whether you're selling them software, or you're, doing their outside accounting, or their taxes, or their doctor, whatever I need, I kind of want to come back to you. And then you enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think there's not any secret sauce in that, other than I think we've always had, and I've always had, like just a really long-term view on like the world.
Have you always been that way?
I don't know.
Because you are that way. I've noticed that about you.
I think I have, and sort of like, I guess if I'm drawing my own themes from this conversation, it's like backing into things and then recognizing patterns after the fact.
Yeah.
So, which is another way of saying just like, be who you are and do what you're going to do, and the pattern matching will sort of happen. And then you look back and you're like, oh yeah, that's
why that happened.
Yeah. Totally.
My grandpa talks a lot about how, I don't remember who the quote is. I'll have to go back and look. But the quote is that I wouldn't recommend my path to anybody, but for me it seemed more or less inevitable. But you only recognize that in hindsight.
Yeah.
Because there's little conversations that you have, or there's introductions that you take, like our introduction to each other.
Yeah.
Where you're not looking for anything in it.
Right.
One person that knows you, and that same person knows this person. They just feel like, there's probably a reason you two need to know each other.
Right.
But then, and even in looking at it at first blush, there's not a whole lot of through lines that are common between what I do for a living and what you do for a living. Unless you boil it down to the fact that we're both in customer service businesses.
Yeah.
We both operate our businesses as though we're an internal component of our customer's business.
Yeah.
Like, we take it that seriously. Something I've noticed from you that I have seen now in working with some of your staff is that there are times when you get on the phone with an attorney and you recognize a pacing to their conversation that has to be influenced by their billing.
Interesting.
Where it's like, let me tell you the long version of this story so that I get past the 6-minute interval or the 15-minute interval. That happens a lot, man.
Yeah.
And I would say that you're an exception to that.
Yeah.
And in my experience with some of your other attorneys, they're the same way.
Yeah.
There's this recognition in the early part of the conversation of, there's a reason we're having this conversation. The billable portion of this, I'm going to get to quickly and tell you what you need to know. I'll give you the boilerplate. If you want to dig into it more, we absolutely can.
Yeah.
But then everything beyond that is structured to have that long-term relationship in mind, knowing that if I go start another business one day, I want to make that one phone call.
Right.
I don't want to have to go through the process of finding another attorney and vetting them for what they do and checking references and all that.
Yeah, or if your friends call you up and they go, I'm starting a thing. Yeah. I mean, no one gets exclusivity in this world, and so all you can hope for is that your hat's in the ring when there's decisions like that. But I think one of the things that I like to, and again, you kind of mentioned earlier, like I'm not a salesy person, and yet we're all in sales.
Yeah.
And so there's I don't know if it's an art or if it's just kind of the way that I am and we practice, but one of the things I do say when I'm having a conversation where it's like, here's our opportunity to say, here's how we're different. A lot of us have been on the business side of it, like in-house. So there's several of us that have been general counsels and not everybody has, but I think one of the hallmarks of our practice is that sort of, it's like a pragmatism. You know, if you've run a business or been a part of a business where you exist in a P&L, and everybody has, you just don't always know it at the time.
Yeah.
Or like at a law firm, you're in sort of the power part of the P&L, and then when you go and you're a lawyer in-house, you're not in the power part of the P&L, and you're very aware of that. And so just knowing that there's a business context on all these things is really important. And I found, particularly in markets like we're in right now and post-COVID, there was an explosion of activity post-COVID, M&A in kind of 2020, 2021, and it started to cool down in 2022. And, you know, every business has its business model. And with firms, we became more and more aware of business models. And like, I don't think that's a great thing when you're a consumer and you start becoming really aware of the business model. Like, it's good questions to ask and you want to follow those threads. But what we saw was firms that used to have a bunch of activity in this quadrant, and that quadrant died. And so they're like, okay, now let's go find other places to play. But trying to replicate the revenues or the business that they had in another space meant sometimes unnatural activities, like digging in deeper on issues, or they didn't used to care about this diligence issue, and now we're spending time with 5 lawyers on a phone call, and you're like, that's that same thing where I'm listening in and hearing that. I'm like, is this a billing mechanism? And it's not all that crass. But maybe sometimes it is. But you become aware of it. And so that's like back to the sort of like long-term view of the world. If you're just doing what needs to be done and you have a pragmatism, and like, we're all capitalists, so like, I have a business and I have a target margin and I'm aware of all those things. But if I'm really focused on the value proposition and not like super indexed on the margin or this transaction and what's happening in this conversation and the yield of that, then over time your MO just becomes a more comfortable one where you're like, look, at the end of the day, you need to trust me, and just like I need to trust you, and you don't want a client to hire you and then second guess every decision. Like, you want people to be vigilant and pay attention.
Yeah.
But there also has to be, like, I talk more and more about like reciprocity in relationships, and it feels a little presumptuous to be a service provider and be like, hey, I want a partnership, but I want a partnership. Yeah. And if that's not there, that's fine. There's plenty of other service providers to go do that. But when it really works, and I trust you and you trust me, and we think we're bringing value, and you see that, and I can help you do certain things, then that relationship like totally opens up.
Why do people not do that? Because I've recognized what you're talking about, but there's no sex appeal to that because you're not going to grow a business quickly doing it that way.
Yeah.
It's all based on relationship.
Right.
So why do you see people make the decision to go the easier route?
Yeah.
To get the billing hours by having longer conversations?
Yeah.
Do you recognize it in your space?
I see it. Yeah, I see it in our space. And there are some that are more egregious examples than others. And I think there's a lot of good actors out there. But I think if you can stitch together a number of people under a common roof that all operate that way, it's really powerful. Because you will find players out there that operate in that way, but they may be within a larger system where they don't.
Yeah.
And it's just like a public company or a private company. You know, public companies have to answer to the market, and they, you know, I'll never forget like my first broader sales meeting when I was at Dell, and one of the senior VPs came up and he said, "Oh, I've been at this company for 32 quarters." And I was like, "Wait, who talks about court?" And I was like, "They do. You're a public company. This is before they went private, and it's all your time horizon, right? And the pressures that are on you. And so if you need to deliver for whatever reason, your time horizon influences the way you act, and it influences your business. And so if you don't have that time horizon, the thing that is, I mean, there's probably a natural limiter on growth. You know, we really value like our autonomy and our ability to make decisions and our ability to go, well, this is a conversation that's important for me to have. Not necessarily because I think it's going to turn into a deal next quarter, but because maybe I just want to have it. Or maybe it's important to this business, but it could be a year down the road. Or it could, you know, like we continually see, and I bet you do too, things bear fruit, if that's your measure of kind of like, you know, yield.
Yeah.
It totally unpredictable times, and sometimes a decade. You know, like, hey, we had this one thing. Like I have a client who, I love this, like the way that this happened, but when I was back as the general counsel, we bought a company, and we had a little bit of litigation over a sales commission plan, and those are often fraught with dispute, right?
Yeah.
I think I'd landed this deal and you're supposed to pay me this.
Right.
The commission plan's a little murky or whatever. So we ended up in litigation with one of the sales leaders of a company that we acquired. I was the general counsel, so I'm manning the litigation with an outside firm. And we went all the way through and we resolved it, whatever. The guy who was the guy we were suing called me, I don't know, 2 or 3 years later. And he said, "Hey, you probably didn't expect to get this call, but you remember me from the courtroom." He's like, "I just kind of really liked the way you operated through that. I think it was fair. Like we were fighting, but you know, like it all seemed like the way that I would have wanted that to go. It resolved.
I like the way you handled yourself.
I like the way you handled yourself.
Yeah.
We're doing a software startup, and would it be crazy if we worked together on this?" And I was like, "I think that's actually awesome. You know, like."
Yeah.
Because, you know, there's plenty of people that would say, "Well, you should have scorched the earth," and that, you know, all that. But it's just, you hit the nail on the head. Like it has to work for you.
Yeah.
And I think what's worked for me, and I think what's worked for our firm, is to have like that, you know, broader view on the marketplace. And again, it makes it more fun as a human. Like at the end of the day,
it makes it more fun. It makes it more rewarding to you. The challenge that it creates is once you know that a transaction like that exists or a partnership like that exists, and how much more fulfilling those are than the ones that are much more transactional and they come in and come out and there's no like mutual appreciation for how complex the other person's job is.
Yeah.
You don't want to deal with those anymore.
Yeah.
I only want the top of the muffin. I don't want the part in the wrapper. Give me the good stuff.
Yeah.
And we have so many customers like that now where we have a relationship with them where we appreciate them as a client. We appreciate the logo on the website because some of those clients are really noteworthy.
Yeah.
But we appreciate so much more the relationship we have with them and the value they see in what we do. And those relationships are so much more fulfilling.
Yeah.
They just take time to develop. There's no shortcut to it.
Yeah.
It's time and your ability to make decisions based on your character and who the kind of professional you want to be over the course of the long haul.
Yeah.
So talk about, you're an older man. You already said you're older than I am.
Okay, true.
So talk about, you're at this place in your life where your kids are leaving the house, going to college. And I'm sure that you and your wife, who is also an attorney, right? Your wife is?
Yeah.
I've talked about what's coming with an empty nest.
Yeah.
And the paradigm shift that's inevitable in that, where your life is built around kids and their schedules and their needs for 18 years, and then it ceases to be quickly.
Totally.
Have y'all talked about what that looks like? And then follow-up question would be, have you thought about how your involvement at the firm or where your place at the firm will be as you get more and more of your time back from having to focus on family?
Yeah. Yeah, really good questions, and something, we do think about that and talk about that. My wife and I are both like maniacally focused on our kids. I think one of the beauties of like having this business and having the autonomy of being sort of like the person who started it, and I answer to a whole ton of clients, but really ultimately my partners, and but we have a lot of autonomy there, so I can make every sports event that I want to make, and like I'm allowed to prioritize in those ways. I don't know like the answers to those questions. It's going to be really interesting to see like how does that shift focus, because you could say, okay, well now the kids are off doing their thing, and so I've got more time to pour into the business. And at the same time, I will tell you, I bet I've got 10 years on you, if not more. But although for the viewers, we're both just
are a much
super
older
handsome guys.
You're much older than I am.
So anyway, like you get into these, kids are in high school, and you just start contemplating, like, what does the next phase look like, and how long is that phase, and what do I want to spend my time doing? And for me, all this stuff, like I really enjoy practicing law, but what I really like is the people part of practicing law, and I like being in a position where I can be a counselor or I can be an advisor, and there's a lot of different ways that can take shape. I think a lot about like succession planning for our business. And I think sort of like anybody's business, you sort of care the most when you're, the one who like started it. And,
when your name's on the door.
When your name's on the door. And so to me, I view that as like, hopefully an amazing opportunity for someone, right? To kind of come in, and I hope somebody wants that. And if not, then that'll be sort of the end of the journey. Neither Evan nor I or our other partners are like crazy about like name and legacy and imprint and all that kind of stuff. It's just like, wow, we've built this thing for 14 years and we've got some brand equity. We do, I think, make a meaningful difference in the startup ecosystem in the cities where we practice, and that's really fun. It's really fulfilling, and it'd be a shame to see that go away.
Yeah.
I would like to see that continue on.
Yeah.
I don't really care if my name's on it, but I would like the thing to exist. And so I view that as like an opportunity for someone who's younger and hungry and coming up and going, I want to take those tailwinds and like do something with it. So that would be my goal. And then to change how I'm spending my time. I don't want to be 83 and die at my desk, there's those stories that's not me at all.
Lots of them.
But I'd like to be out in the field doing stuff like this and meeting people. Like I get really energized by the coffees and the grabbing a beer after work, or going to, I swim a bunch, and there's like a number of guys that I do some professional work with that are guys that have swum in college or played polo or something, and we go out and we'll swim in the morning or in the afternoon, like stuff like that, where you can just kind of go enjoy people, and bring those, have the Venn diagram of those worlds overlap a little bit. And then my wife's working right now. She's poured a ton of energy into our kids and like this journey. I'm also realizing that it doesn't just go away.
No.
It just takes a different form.
Right.
I think it's more like helpless worrying than it is like actual like active architecting.
It makes you feel relevant too. You need
so
that.
We got to figure that out, and I think a lot of people do, and I think it'll be a good opportunity to like reconnect with each other and figure out what we want to do. And
what's the overarching feeling there that y'all have? Is it excitement for the green pastures you're walking into, where there's nuance there, or is it like intimidation or anxiety around like, I don't know what to do with my hands now that I've got all this time?
There's probably something like that, and I don't think we're close enough to it yet, because we just now got out of the gauntlet that is like
Yeah.
getting a kid through the sort of college application process and getting them off, and then our will be our youngest one, Adam, will be like right on the heels of that. So we're just in the thick of that, and that feels very active, and that's super fun for me. In fact, I have to again like coach myself to not try to take as active a role, because I want to advise, and I have opinions on networks and people and trajectories and all that, and like taking a step back and letting your like trusting some decision making process and not like being in there doing it. That is like a super hard thing, but
Trusting that the 19 years you already put in will have paid off, and you don't have to continue the parenting.
And what's amazing, and I feel super fortunate, I my kids are good students, and I think they've got good heads on their shoulders, and I think they're going to have a lot of success. The most rewarding thing has been to already see those moments where you're like, oh, you just made an independent judgment, and you did a good thing. I like the choices they make with their friends, and the choices they make with school, and how they spend their activities. Because I had to learn early on, like, you want to do this like protective bubble parent thing, and sort of like, I'm going to make sure you never like encounter danger or bad influences or bad friendships or drugs or alcohol or anything. And you're like, you know what? It's a world, and that world reaches your kid way faster than you think. And if you think you're going to seal it off hermetically, you're wrong. And so the best you can hope for is that you've equipped them to sort of make those decisions when they've encountered those things out on their own. And I feel really comfortable about that. But we're still in that phase of like, it's really active. So we haven't even sort of gotten to the point where I'm like, what do we do with all this time? And how do we, I think we're more in that sort of classic, like, mourning the change that's coming. And our son's going to UT, and we live in Austin, and so
they'll be
like,
close.
Super happy about that, because I think mom would be freaking out if we were sending 1,000 miles away.
In my experience with it, just in seeing my parents go through the empty nesting process, and in seeing my wife's parents go through it, it's harder on the mom, for sure. Way harder on the mom. So good thing to be.
My sister went through it with her kids, and I think it was a hard one. And I think I'm going to have to be. I want to be a lot more deliberate about. It's really easy to fall into the patterns, right? Like, we're thinking about the kids. We're in logistics. There's always plenty for me to obsess about and work with on my business. There's always something I can do, and so allocating the time, and not just like, we had a conversation recently with my wife, and she was like, well, I like to go like swim, and she plays tennis, and we do other things. And so it's like, do we have the common things, and will we, and I think part of this whole next phase is to like, let's kind of just re-explore all that, and maybe you find some new common things. And it's just like an opportunity to reset all those patterns. But I think you have to be deliberate about it. That's what I'm like realizing. So we'll see.
The challenge that creates for most people is that there's a tension between, we've talked about this before, but when you are dad, husband, it requires a certain amount of time and attention from you. When you are law firm leader, CEO, partner of the business, it requires something that's mutually exclusive to that time. So you can either be putting time over here, or you can be putting time here. And the challenge most people that I talk to have that live in that world is you can pick one at a time to focus on, but you can't be focused on both at a time, unless you want to do them both poorly. But there's different phases of life where this one requires more attention from you than you've been giving it, and you have to not only pivot, but you have to acknowledge in the first place that, oh, I've been screwing this up. I've been spending too much time over here. So you're entering this phase now where the time is necessarily going to shift, because now those people aren't in your house. And how you make decisions on where to reallocate those resources you have is pretty important.
It's really important, and there's an extra layer of complexity to it, which I think is your identity. Right? Like, you start a business, that's your work activity. By definition, you're spending a lot of your time, on that thing. And then I think even more so when you have like an entrepreneurial element, or even if you're just the entrepreneur, architect of your own career. I think anybody sort of like wants to do it well, and they, and so that gets tied up with your identity, and you're like, oh, what do you do? Well, I do this thing. And so how do you phase that thing down and you just have to, again, I think you have to be really conscious about that. Like, okay, I don't need to get fed by this identity here, or I did this thing. My wife had a brunch with a friend of hers, and this like stuck in my head, and I can't stop thinking about it. This was like a week or two ago. Her friend, professional marketer, had worked at a bunch of giant enterprises, and is currently at one of those enterprises that I won't say. But they had gone to lunch, and I think they were, I don't know, an hour and a half into lunch, and my wife works part-time, and so it was not a day that she was supposed to be doing something, but she, this group of people's like hanging out, and it was a little more leisurely lunch. She's like, hey, do you need to like get back to work, or do you, what's going on? She's like, oh, I'm in my post-achievement lifestyle.
Post-achievement lifestyle.
Called it her pal. And I don't know if she coined that. I think that probably exists somewhere out there, but I'm like, wait a second. Just the concept, I'm a super ambitious, driven person, and if there's a thing to go knock down, I want to kind of try to knock it down. I want to do well. I want to win. I want to, present well and do, but I'm like, it's a marathon, it's a 26-mile sprint. And at some point you go, am I allowed to not want to sprint anymore? And
Right.
Of course you are. And then do I want to sprint in other areas? And so again,
The challenge for the achiever is in recognizing that just because you're not sprinting in this area anymore doesn't mean you're being lazy.
Yeah.
Because that's where my brain goes is if
or
I'm
that
not
your worth dropped.
exactly.
Yeah.
Or am I kind of bitching out on this now?
Yeah.
By not pushing the gas pedal as hard as I possibly
Right.
can.
Yeah.
That's
exactly
a very
right.
hard thing to pull those
Yeah.
resources back and allocate them elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because again, it's admitting when you failed
Yeah.
or you've put a little too much emphasis on something that now you don't need to put that much emphasis on anymore.
Yeah.
And it requires rework and habits.
And it gets really deeply philosophical because you start thinking, again, like all of this stuff is framed with raising kids and how you want to live your life, and realizing, you give a lot of these lessons, but more of the lessons are just like how you live your life,
Right.
and what you've modeled to them, because they're absorbing from long before you thought they were,
Right.
and they stop taking the input long before you thought they did.
Right.
And it's really, I think about work ethic has always been really important to me. I think I saw my dad work hard. I saw my mom work hard. That always felt like there's a lot I can't control, but I can control how much effort I give to something. And that maybe helps, like if I'm not the sharpest tool in the drawer, well, I can outwork you. And like that just always felt like a good thing to me. And you can obviously take that to, its logical, extension and take that too far. And so it was really important for me, not to like actively model a work ethic for my kids so they would see it, but I was just like, this is a good thing. That was a value of
It's the
mine,
meta
right?
skill you're teaching them that will apply
Yeah.
to whatever the thing
Right.
is that they take an interest
Totally.
in. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
I
you
totally
go,
agree.
wait, am I doing too much of this? What am I modeling? Is it like,
Right.
oh, well, you're always doing this kind of thing? And it's just, it's hard, as you
You're
get
walking
more
the line
conscious of those
between
things.
work ethic and workaholism,
Right.
and making sure they see one and not the other.
Or back to that sort of path conversation, like go find a path, because the thing I did doesn't mean the thing that you have to do. And that's really hard to sort of let go of that control.
Did you have parents that were attorneys?
No.
What gave you an interest in it in the first place?
I have no idea.
Really?
It's really fun. Yeah, no attorneys in my family. My dad's a psychologist, and my mom worked in the oil industry and was like a crude scheduler. So they both worked and worked hard. I thought, again, sort of back to more of like philosophies of life. I thought I was better at the sort of like the liberal arts, the writing, the poli-sci kind of stuff than like the science and math. So I wasn't a STEM person. I'd taken it, but that wasn't like, oh, this is where I'm going to excel or where I've kind of found a passion. And so law school felt to me like, with a English poli-sci degree, a very good way to either practice law or have that as a springboard to go do a number of other things. So it felt like a good career step more than anything.
Yeah.
And what's funny is I got all the way to law school before, back to this sort of like backing in versus being really conscious. If you're just like a lay person in sort of American or maybe even world society, and you think about lawyers, you're getting unless they're in your family, you're getting it from pop culture. You're getting it from TV shows and movies, and it's My Cousin Vinny and it's Matlock and it's, NCI and Few Good Men. Like,
Yeah.
it's courtroom stuff, right? You don't see, other than like LA Law and now Suits, there weren't a lot of like corporate lawyer shows. And so I got all the way to law school before really fully appreciating, oh, there's like transactional law, and then there's like the litigation thing. And I got there and I was like, well, I don't have any desire to be arguing in the limelight. I like building more than tearing down. This felt like a much more, like, the corporate thing was like an instant resonance, because I'm like, I want to help businesses grow. I want to do this thing. And, but I'm like, wow, I got all the way to law school before I realized that. But it's funny, I had a conversation with somebody we were interviewing the other day who made the exact same comment. And she went to Harvard and was like, yeah, I didn't realize until
Yeah.
I got there that there was that big fundamental distinction. But the flip side of that is like, you don't have to have it all figured out when you think you do.
Yeah.
And the world we live in today, I'm sure you see this with your kids too, you have to like specialize really quickly. You have to figure out what you know really quickly. And that, like, I lament that because it's not really true. It may be harder now, but you can still go into the world a little unknown and open and figure it out as you go.
I'm 38 and I still don't feel like I have it figured out.
Yeah.
So to have taken the time to get to the place where I felt comfortable that I had my path figured out in order to start the path would have been a total waste of time.
Totally.
Because I still wouldn't have figured it out.
Yeah.
And I probably wouldn't have ended up here.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just have to pick and choose your spots and know that if it's a failure, you can get back to ground zero pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't think I've got it figured out either. And I've often thought of like a career progression. I've even used this sort of terminology, very linear, like tracks on the train. Well, if I don't do this, I'm going to get off the track. It's going to be harder to jump back on. And maybe that's true, but I've seen more often than not, it doesn't have to be. It just means you need to kind of like reframe what you're thinking of in terms of your destination and how you get there and all that kind of stuff. And, you've just confirmed I am definitely older than you. I don't have it figured out. It's going to be harder and harder to like jump into a new thing or a new career. Like, I don't really have a desire to do that, but I just have a greater growing appreciation for all the different ways that you can do your thing. And by the way, how you define what success is to you. I think it's really easy to be like, well, it's getting this job and it's making this salary and it's like money because, we need money to transact in the world and all that. But there's also a lot of fulfillment that comes from growing something or building something or employing a team or getting to work side by side with the people you like, or to not having a pressure or opting out of a certain, kind of rubric of consumerism or whatever and being like, no, I want to create art and I'm going to do this thing. Like, it's all open. And I think I had a much more narrow view, and I'm hoping to like be stripping that away as I'm supposed to be teaching lessons to my kids as they go out into the world.
That's right.
Yeah.
Ryan, thanks for taking time to do this, man.
This was really fun.
That was the quickest hour of my life gone by. So I appreciate you carrying the conversation.
No,
thank
you. This is always fun. And
we'll
like you
definitely
said,
do it again.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, because I wrote down 4 things that I wanted to get into that we won't get into, but we'll get into on a subsequent conversation.
I love it.
So thanks for taking time to do it, man.
It was easy. My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.